Beverly Unitarian Church sits on unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ottawa nations who cared for and stewarded this land and signed the Treaty of Chicago. Other tribes, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Illinois Confederacy, and Peoria peoples, maintain relationships with this area too.
Despite government policies that enforced genocide of American Indians, Chicago today is home of the sixth largest urban Indian population and consists of members from well over 100 different tribal nations. This is adapted from a statement by the American Indian Center.
Welcome to the Beverly Unitarian Church online worship. My name is Greg Lawler. I'm serving as the worship associate today. I'm glad to welcome you to worship today. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation of children, young youths, and adults of many races, religions, secular identities, genders, sexual orientations, abilities, education, life experiences, and traditions. Here we celebrate a diversity of beliefs, striving always to make space for more. All of you are sacred. You are welcome here. Whatever your past or present is like, we invite you to walk into the future with us. Like other Unitarian Universalist congregations, we affirm 7 principles, which are not doctrine or dogma, but rather our shared values and moral guide. Our minister is the Reverend David Schwartz. Today, we are fortunate to have a service led by a member of our congregation, Stacey Recht. We especially welcome visitors and hope you'll stay for the virtual coffee hour after the service on Zoom, using the link that will be shared at the end of the service. We look forward to the day when we will be able to meet you in person. Although we currently remain distant physically, we can stay connected. To get more involved, check out our Facebook page and our website. Contact the office if you would like to sign up for our monthly newsletter. And now, let us join together in spirit and prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. My name is Stacey Recht, and I am a member of Beverly Unitarian Church. I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today about my favorite topics that begin with my own journey through my personal garden, my love and appreciation for the tallgrass prairie we all share, the restorative justice of the act of gardening, and hope for the future of our earth. My family lives in a small house on a huge lot, at least by Chicago standards. We've divided our lot among the 3 of us. Philip gets a third, on which he has created a promising border orchard and a vegetable garden that I'm proud to say delivers well into December. He and his garden assistant Hazel grow enough to donate half of the produce to the food pantry. Our 2-year-old Hazel gets a third, literally a kindergarten, which she uses for running, climbing, swinging, a kiddie pool, a sandbox, and I get the rest. We each delight in visiting each other's gardens and in tending our own. Converting my third into a native plant garden began 5 years ago as a fun hobby for me. Having learned about the relative ease of caring for plants adapted to our harsh region, I planted a 10-foot square garden of pollinator magnets. Looked pretty sparse at first, but as my garden grew, both the plants themselves and in surface area, as I converted more and more of our lawn to prairie, my regard for plant and insect intelligence has grown tenfold. Gardening is more than a hobby or an act of environmentalism, though it is those things. It's also citizen science, meditative, physical, and spiritual practice, and a form of restorative justice.
Please join me in saying the words for our Chalice Lighting, which will be printed on your screen. We light this candle, the flame of our heritage. May it ignite hope in our lives, in our community, and in the world.
To me, native plant stewardship represents one form of restorative justice, where instead of seeking victory over nature, we seek its restoration. Instead of a victory garden, a justice garden. As I remove lawn grass and invasive ground covers and slowly begin replacing them with uniquely beautiful, tall-growing native species, I hope my yard represents a pretty but visible rejection of the finely manicured, tightly bordered private property, a contrast to the European formal garden design that's been imposed on our now degraded soil. I want to offer a viable alternative to the non-native, shallow-rooted, close-cropped carpets of lawn. A tiny protest against the displacement of the indigenous living legacy of our region, against the subjugation of nature to a completely human-centric and Eurocentric aesthetic. During the world wars of the 20th century, the U.S. government urged landholders to augment the national food supply to help prevent shortages with what were famously called victory gardens. They asked all patriotic Americans to feed themselves, while agricultural produce and government spending went overseas to the war effort. This propaganda campaign worked, as Americans set about converting their ornamental lawns to productive vegetable gardens and began to feel like they were contributing in some small way to the great American project. I'd like to resurrect the social concept of the victory garden, but not for our century's war efforts. As matriotic Americans who see ourselves as planetary rather than national loyalists, we can contribute our small plots toward earth justice, while we demand our national spending focuses deeply on closing our many equity divides and robust global climate policy. And since we emphatically do not seek to win victory over, but rather restore justice to our earth and to each other, we can now think of our gardens as a chain of connected and interconnected justice gardens. Probably the most visible proponent of this idea is the ecologist Douglas Tallamy, an author of the persuasive Nature's Best Hope. I've invited Garrick Smothers to join us in reading a passage.
Chances are you never thought your garden, indeed all of your property, as a wildlife preserve that presents the last chance we have for sustaining plants and animals that were once common throughout the U.S. But that is exactly the role of our suburban landscapes are playing. Garden as though life depends on it.
And now we invite you to join us for the story for all ages. Can you say story for all ages?
The magical world. A world exists where magical fairies are everywhere. In fact, for every human being, there are hundreds of millions of fairies. Most of the fairies are invisible, hidden from sight or uniquely skilled at blending in. In this fairy world, all the food, all the animals, all the plants, all life, and all death depend on the fairies. Fairies take care of the flowers and feed baby birds. There are fairies of the woods, fairies of the meadows, and fairies of the city, fairies who make sweet things to eat. Fairies who do the sacred task of returning the dead to the earth, and fairies who help usher in new life. There are even fairies who sing late afternoon into twilight, others who follow the moon, and even some who bring the light of the stars down into the earth. In this magical world, everything alive needs the fairies. And even though only a few are harmful, many humans view the fairies with fear and even seek to destroy them by poisoning them. Some unknowingly destroy their hidden homes with huge machines because they didn't see them. But some humans are beginning to notice the fairies, even though they hide and greet them with wonder and show them love by fighting for their protection. This very world is called Earth, and here on Earth, we don't call them fairies, even though they are magical. We call them arthropods. Insects, spiders, centipedes, millipedes, bugs.
Each week we come together as a community, either in person or remotely as we're doing now, and we share what's important with us with the members of our community. These may be joys, they may be sorrows, they may be concerns. In person, we would light a candle for each joy or concern. Remotely, what we do is we ask you to please place your joy or concern into the chat box, remembering that it's a public forum. If you wish to express that you have a concern or sorrow, but you don't want to express it precisely, please feel free to use the two eyes, which represents the two fingers that we used in church. I will take this opportunity to light one candle, which will represent all the candles being lit for the joys and concerns.
Sometimes I wish I could photosynthesize so that just by being, just by shimmering at the meadow's edge or floating lazily on a pond, I could be doing the work of the world while standing silent in the sun. Robin Wall Kimmerer.
There is nothing alien about nature. Nature is all that exists. It's the earth and all that's on it. It's the universe and all that's in it. It's God, never at rest. It's you, me, us, them, struggling upstream or drifting down.
Before displacing many of the indigenous people, plants, and animals of our region, colonizing settlers began moving west and met the tall grass prairie that existed right where we stand or sit today. And what kind of land did they meet? Giant grasses and the original skyscrapers, skyscraping forbs, leggy, long-necked sunflowers, and broad, multifloral umbels, some towering over horse and rider, and broad and tall swaths of bold purple and bright yellows, fuzzed out seed heads sending their offspring floating, and enormous blue stem grasses with their constellations of spikelets, and roots that stretched deeper below ground than stems above ground, and the wide prairie disappearing into a horizon of oak savannas, and slow rivers crossing an absolutely flat topography that allowed the wind to barrel forcefully in all directions. As Willa Cather famously wrote,
Anybody can love the mountains, but it takes a soul to love the prairie.
And indeed, seeing nothing special particularly about overgrown grasses and spindly yellow flowers, and discovering the extremely valuable soil built up by glacial movement, bison, insects, plants, and fungi over millions of years, colonizers converted it all for human use in the span of about 50 years. The prairie all but vanished, subdivided into industrial plots of corn and soy, not to feed ourselves, but to fatten livestock. Dense urban spaces bereft of greenery, suburban carpets of imported grasses that require constant chemical treatments and manicuring, slashed and split by high-speed roads, and poisoned by exhaust and agriculture runoff. In Soil Keepers, Chicago-based ecologist Nance Khlem asks,
who does this land, this place, this city, and all its layers, open sky, tree canopy, shrub layer, grasses, forbs, and crops, topsoil, subsoil, and bedrock belong to? A lack of understanding that our lives depend on our biological systems result in a broad scale insecurity in all these realms.
Today, 1% of 1% of the original tallgrass prairie survives. It is the single rarest biome in North America and one of the most endangered in the entire world. Truly, the remnants of our prairie are so very special.
Whatever else prairie is, grass, sky, wind, it is most of all a paradigm of infinity, a clearing full of many things except boundaries, and its power comes from its apparent limitlessness. William Least Heatmoon, PrairyErth, a deep map.
Worry not, or rather worry less. I have great news for the prairie, for you, and for the other animals who make it their home. Unlike largely ineffective individual acts like single stream recycling, you can make an actual difference. In fact, you can see the difference. You can experience and enjoy the difference. Native plantings, even in small settings like home gardens, even in small corners of home gardens, can actually increase bird biodiversity in a region. Not only that, the roots of native plants reach much deeper than those of lawn grass, improving soil and water quality. And like our oceans and forests, healthy prairies can mitigate the climate crisis if we just let them. Prairie plants stretch their roots 15 or more feet into the ground, sequestering and storing more carbon underground than a forest can store above ground. Once established, native plantings require less maintenance than introduced exotics which, like creeping Charlie or Bishop's goutweed, can escape cultivation and run rampant, with no insects adapted to feed on them. Prairie plants that are integral to the ecosystem just can't compete. And introduced plants can become invasive and require dangerous chemical treatments to contain, and that does further harm. But we can mitigate that harm right now in our lifetimes by replacing exotics with native species and beginning the work of restoring the balance between soil, plant, and animal that was here long before any human beings arrived, native or European. The balance that built the rich prairie biome, our home. Oh, chattering, bursting, glittering spring. We know you will return to us soon, with new growth and young insects, bright, crisp skies and jagged storms. Sometimes we fear you will arrive silent, stillborn, warm but not fragrant, damp but not fertile. Do you believe we will be able to watch again the way the sun slides around the early petals, the way the bee, heavy with pollen, touches in and departs, and touches in again? Thank you for restoring hope in the power of renewal, oh chattering, bursting, glittering spring. It may not seem like it today, but my garden, and yours too, will soon reawaken. That's why I chose this weekend to share my story with you.
Like so many, I have lived with depression and anxiety through most of my life, which returns in waves as seasons move through me and bring memories of loss. Spring brings old grief from watching my father die in June 2007. Every December brings the tiny faceless ghost of a loss too tender to name. Postpartum depression, self-doubt, powerlessness, and of course, eco-anxiety have visited and departed. Some visit again and again. Some move in to stay. I experience a noticeable increase in endorphins and serotonin working in my garden, especially when I'm doing the physically demanding work. I get a jolt of dopamine at the first sight of early shoots and blooms, a feeling of well-being when I smell the familiar umami aroma of plant nectars and soil mingling on a warm summer afternoon. I feel curiosity and kinship watching a caterpillar chomping a leaf, butterflies and bees chasing each other from stem to stem. At the end of the season, I see overwintering and migratory birds alike, enjoying a seed head buffet of dried joe pie, goldenrod, asters, echinacea, blazing stars, rattlesnake master, and all manner of creatures who rely upon the food and shelter provided even by a small patch of native plantings and leaves left to curl and decompose. I gain winter inspiration from the stark prairie stem standing defiant in the wind and snow, or resting to recover strength for the return again of new growth. I love knowing that the hollow stems will become homes for solitary nesting native bees who co-evolved with these plants. In the Justice Garden, we are not victors in a war with harsh nature. Rather, we're students of these beings who have made intimate peace with the living world. The earth does not need us. We need the earth, and we can't save the planet until we stop seeing ourselves as the subject of that slogan and the planet as the object. The writer Mokwapani, in reflecting on the response of her yarrow in her California garden as the wildfires raged last summer, encourages us to
recognize our more than human kin as central characters in their own stories rather than victims in ours. Do we really want to continue the narrative of the Anthropocene, where we frame humans as the failed caretakers of Earth and use the quality of our own survival as the key measuring stick of planetary health? However true parts of this anthropocentric narrative may be, it's one that inspires despair and guarantees overwhelm. For a moment, I center the entire universe around the yarrow being in my garden. They are native to these lands, where seawater and forest smoke have mingled in the air for millennia. I celebrate their resilience, and I dream of a landscape inspired by their wisdom. One where humankind reframes the weight of our impact as potentiality rather than doom. One where we lay our soft bellies on the soil and ask the spiders what they want. One where in place of hierarchies of anthropic saviorism, we engage in networks of interspecies aid. What story do you want to tell?
To face the climate crisis with the courage and creativity we will need, we must overcome our eco-anxiety, our fear of climate collapse, and our shame over the human role in it. We need to cultivate our own resilience and incorporate non-human intelligences. I don't know if it will work, but I know it won't work if we give up and stop trying. What can one person do? Well, we can each cultivate justice by voting, by direct social and political action in favor of anti-racist, bold climate policy. We can select native plants by reputable sources committed to preservation and organic growing methods, not poachers from wild spaces. And in the fall, we can leave the leaves for insects. We can each cultivate our own internal awareness by opening our five senses to the non-human stories and victories around us. We can find the courage to abandon unhelpful eco-anxiety by uncentering ourselves and our stories and boldly, matriotically tending our own justice gardens right here where we are. The final hymn today is from Usher's performance at the Obama White House. It's a medley of songs from Marvin Gaye's classic What's Going On, including, of course, the ecological anthem, Mercy, Mercy Me. Please sing along and enjoy. And stay for closing words of joy and hope from one of my favorite writers, Wall Kimmerer.
Sadly, decades later, the problems Marvin wrote of are still prevalent. I just want to ask a question. Who really cares to save a world in despair? Who really cares? There'll come a time when the world won't be singing, flowers won't grow, and the bells won't be ringing. back. Come on, y'all. Yeah. Whoa. Oh, mercy, mercy me. All things ain't what they used to be. No, no. Where did all the blue skies go? Poison is the wind that blows from the north and south and east. Whoa, mercy, mercy me. All things ain't what they used to be. No, no. Oil wasted on the ocean and upon our sea, fish full of mercury. Whoa, oh, mercy, mercy me. All things ain't what they used to be. No, no. Radiation underground and in the sky. Animals and birds who live here by our eye. Oh, mercy, mercy me. All things ain't what they used to be. What about this overcrowded land? How much more abuse from man can she stand? Come on, y'all. Clap your hands. Yeah. Yeah. We need love, empathy. We need compassion. We got one word. Gotta love it together, 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 together. Make it better. Love, darling. Up till now. Put it together. Gotta make it better.
Both our silent meditation and now our closing words are from an interview with mother, scientist, professor, and member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants, and Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses. This audio is from the program On Being.
I agree with you that the language of sustainability is pretty limited. If something is going to be sustainable, its ability to provide for us will not be compromised into the future. And that's all a good thing. But at its heart, sustainability, the way we think about it, is embedded in this worldview that we as human beings have some ownership over these what we call resources, and that we want the world to be able to continue to keep, that human beings can keep taking and keep consuming. The notion of reciprocity is really different from that. It's an expansion from that, because what it says is that our role as human people is not just to take from the earth, and the role of the earth is not just to provide for our single species. Yeah. So reciprocity actually kind of broadens this notion to say that not only does the earth sustain us, but that we have the capacity and the responsibility to sustain her in return. So it broadens the notion of what it is to be a human person, not just a consumer. And there's such joy in being able to do that, to have it be mutual flourishing instead of the more narrow definition of sustainability, so that we can just keep on taking.
Please join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish the chalice here that it might warm our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again.
Yeah.